And this was an interesting article to read coming out of the UK. It says mother 25 is put in intensive care coma after the very rare reaction to the second jab. It says caused terrifying anaphylactic shocks. It says Kirsty Hex, 25, has suffered 14 anaphylactic shocks since receiving her jab. So she also had a seizure and fractured her wrist, leg, and cheekbone after falling. It says Kara is still in hospital after suffering the most recent anaphylactic shock. And I did a video on this a while back. There was like a batch in California of the jab that they said was not so good, and it was like in the very beginning when people started showing signs of Bell's palsy, and then they put a halt on it because there was like quite a few people, and then of course the narrative is always, you know, no link, right? No link to the poke. There's no way that it was the poke. So they kept getting people to go out there. I will link that video up top. In that video, they acknowledge that you are 10 times more likely to have an anaphylactic reaction. Now, the reason being is because in that video, and I show all the information that came out of the state of California, and so the state itself admits that it was about 1 out of 100,000 people will have a reaction, will have an anaphylactic reaction. But the norm for all other vaccines that came before, like for example the flu vax, is 1 in a million, right? So by their own admission, and I will link that video up top, like I said, by their own admission, you are 10 times more likely to have an anaphylactic reaction as a result of taking this particular jab than all the other ones that came before it. And so they refer to it as something very rare, and that's actually not all that rare by their own admonition. Now, it might be rare in terms of the numbers, but in terms of actually people coming down ill as a result of this, and there's been numerous side effects. Talked about this yesterday about individuals having heart-related issues among young people. There's been many people that have had neurological issues. There's people that have had anaphylactic reactions to the medication, and there's just some people that have just dropped dead. And as far as I've read, I believe it's this particular vax has actually caused more deaths than anyone that came before it. But that is not really a lot of information that you get privy to unless you're actually out there and you're basically digging for this. Unless you're out there digging for this kind of information, a lot of this stuff you really don't hear about. You might hear about it a little bit more now because it's becoming a little more prevalent as more and more people from one country to the next start receiving their poke, and eventually, you know, the information bleeds out. But for many of you, it might be too late. Because you can read this article, is very sad. It shows some very sad pictures, and of course, the FDA official says her issue possibly linked. Right? Why FDA coming out and saying, well, maybe there is a link to what's going on with the jab, and some still say, well, it's rare. It says, but of course we would inoculate our own kids. I mean, that's what they tell you. Now, of course, this was quite interesting looking at the fact checkers on Dr. Fauci. In fact, Dr. Fauci had made a statement a while back where he had said there was around 50 or 60% of those at the FDA that had received their poke. And then people were like, well, then basically what that means is that 40 to 50% of the people, they were like, and then they came like, oh shoot, they didn't think they were going to put that link together. But that's not the point that we're going to talk about. You can link this, you can read this article for yourself on how the fact checkers, of course, you know, try to go through and do mental gymnastics, but that's not what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about this little point right down here, right? So it says, regards the FDA employees, it says Dr. Fauci responded. It says, you know, I'm not 100% sure, Senator. This is quoting him from the video, and I believe the video is in this article for those who are interested. It says, but I think it's probably a little bit more than half, probably around 60%, right? So they asked him how many people took the poke, and he was like, maybe it's around 60%, but he's not quite sure. It says, then Mark said that the number of the FDA employees was probably in the same range, right? So for those who work with Dr. Fauci and those who work at the FDA, it's a bunch of people that were just like, I ain't taking it. And of course, that stirred a few feathers. So he says he can't tell the exact number. And then it says Walensky did not give a percentage, noting that the CDC employees can voluntarily report their status. Right? So this is the point that I wanted to touch on. And is if the CDC employees don't have to designate whether they took the poke, then why do you? Why are people trying to force you to get a card or a passport that says you gotta state whether or not you took it? Right? So that was basically their narrative. Their narrative is like, well, we really don't know because we really don't force them to acknowledge. My question is, why are they doing it to you? So basically, at the end of the day, we can just chalk this up to rules for thee, but not for me.